Emma Parker had always loved winter, but that year the season felt colder than usual. The city lights that once brought her comfort now seemed distant, blurred behind the frost gathering on her apartment window. She pressed her hand against the glass, watching people hurry below laughing, shopping, carrying gifts, and felt that familiar ache of being part of everything, yet belonging to nothing. It had been a long year. Too many hours spent at work, too many dinners eaten alone, and too many "I'm fine" messages sent to friends she rarely saw anymore. At 32, Emma wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't happy either. She lived in the quiet middle ground where life feels stable but hollow. And as the holidays approached, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her was quietly asking for change. When her parents called one evening, suggesting she spend Christmas with her Uncle David in Maple Creek, she hesitated. "Uncle David?" she asked, holding her phone between her shoulder and ear as she packed away her laptop. "I haven't seen him in, 8 years?" Her mother's voice was cheerful as always. "Exactly. He keeps saying the countryside would do you good. You need some fresh air, sweetheart. And maybe some peace." Emma smiled faintly. Peace sounded like a promise she didn't quite believe in, but she agreed. Maybe distance was exactly what she needed. The following week, she packed her bags, loaded her small car, and began the 4-hour drive to Maple Creek. The highway stretched endlessly before her, flanked by frozen fields that shimmered under the morning sun. The world outside looked peaceful, quiet, like it was holding its breath. Inside the car, her favorite songs played softly. But even music couldn't fill the silence she carried every few miles. She thought of the life she'd built, a steady job in marketing, a small apartment filled with muted colors and half-read books, and memories of a relationship that had ended before she could understand why. She wasn't heartbroken anymore, just unsure of what her heart still wanted. As the miles rolled by, her thoughts drifted to her childhood visits to Uncle David's home. He had always been kind and patient, a man who spoke little but listened deeply. His old house stood on the edge of a forest, surrounded by tall pines that whispered when the wind passed through them. There had been bonfires, laughter, and nights when she'd fallen asleep to the sound of rain on the roof. Those memories warmed her now, like small lanterns in the cold dot. By the time she reached Maple Creek, the afternoon sky had turned silver. Snow had begun to fall, soft, delicate flakes floating through the air. She slowed as the familiar wooden sign came into view, the Rivers Estate. Her chest tightened with nostalgia. When she parked in front of the old house, the world felt perfectly still. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the porch lights glowed golden through the snow. Uncle David appeared at the door, bundled in his wool coat, smiling the same calm smile that had always made her feel safe. "Emma," he said, stepping forward to help with her bag. "You made it." "I did," she replied softly. "It looks just like I remember." Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around her. The house smelled like pine wood and cinnamon, and the shelves were still lined with books and old photographs. There was something comforting about how little had changed. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing about her work, the town, the festival that would soon light up the streets. Uncle David listened quietly, then said, "You've been running for a while, haven't you?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Running?" He smiled. "Not away necessarily, just not sure where to go." She let out a quiet laugh, though his words touched a truth she couldn't deny. "Maybe you're right." After dinner, she wandered through the living room, stopping by the large window that overlooked the forest. The snow had deepened, and through the trees she noticed something, a small cabin at the edge of the woods, its windows softly glowing. "Who lives there?" she asked. "New neighbor," Uncle David replied, pouring himself tea. "Moved in a few months ago. A painter from the city. Keeps to himself mostly." "A painter," she repeated, her eyes lingering on the light. There was something about it, a quiet pull she couldn't explain. That night, lying in bed, Emma listened to the wind rustling through the pines. The stillness of the countryside felt different from the city's noise. It wasn't empty. It was alive in its own quiet way. She wondered what it would feel like to start over somewhere like this, to wake up to trees instead of traffic. To spend mornings painting or walking instead of rushing through emails, her eyes drifted to the window again. The cabin's light was still there, glowing faintly through the snow. Somewhere out there, a stranger was awake too. Perhaps lost in thought, perhaps searching for something the same way she was. And though Emma didn't know it yet, that small glimmer of light would soon become a turning point. Beginning she never saw coming. To be continued in Part 2. The Stranger by the Cabin. Part 2. The Past and Connection. The next morning arrived quietly, with snowflakes drifting past the windows and the scent of coffee filling the house. Emma woke to the sound of birds outside and the soft crackle of a fire somewhere below. For the first time in months, she didn't reach for her phone. Instead, she sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the frost shimmer on the glass. There was peace. Here's something fragile but deeply real. After breakfast, Uncle David asked if she'd like to visit the town square. Maple Creek was small, but every December it turned into a postcard. Emma agreed, eager to stretch her legs and rediscover the places she'd only known as a child. The town was alive with quiet. Joy families hanging ornaments, children building snowmen near the church steps, old friends greeting each other as though time had stood still. As they walked through the market, Emma felt something soften inside her. She remembered running through these same streets with a boy named Liam Carter, her uncle's neighbor's nephew, who used to spend summers here too. They had been inseparable then, climbing trees, racing through fields, and staying up too late watching fireflies by the river. She hadn't thought about him in years. "Is the Carter family still around?" she asked as they passed the bakery. Uncle David smiled knowingly. "Not since their nephew moved back from Toronto. You might remember him." Emma blinked. "Liam," he nodded. "He's the one living in the cabin now." For a moment, the world felt smaller. The faint light she'd seen last night suddenly had a FISA memory attached to it. She could almost hear his voice again, laughing through summer air, calling her Em like it was their secret. That afternoon she decided to take a walk. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and the air nipped gently at her cheeks. She followed the narrow trail through the woods, the one that led to the edge of the property where the cabin stood. It looked just as she imagined it, cozy, rustic, with a small porch and smoke curling softly from the chimney. As she hesitated near the path, the cabin door opened. "Emma Parker," a voice said, warm and familiar. "I thought that was you." Liam stepped out, smiling with the kind of calm that comes from time and experience. He was older now, his features more defined, but his eyes, still the same hazel green she remembered, held that gentle spark of mischief. He brushed snow from his jacket and walked toward her, his boots crunching in the snow. "I wasn't sure you'd recognize me," she said, half smiling. "Are you kidding? You used to beat me at every snowball fight on this hill. Some things you don't forget." They both laughed, the sound floating easily between them. It was strange how quickly comfort returned, as if no years had passed at all. He invited her inside, and she followed. The cabin was filled with sketches, half-finished canvases, and the scent of pine and coffee. On one easel stood a painting of the forest at dusk, soft colors, fading light, and a single figure standing beneath the trees. She noticed the familiar outline immediately. "That's the trail near my uncle's house," she said quietly. He nodded. "I painted it last week." "I didn't know you were here then." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe you did, somewhere deep down." They spent the afternoon talking about where life had taken them, about choices made and roads not taken. Liam had left the city 2 years ago after feeling burned out from his job as a graphic designer. "I thought success would feel like peace," he said softly, "but it didn't." Emma nodded. "I know that feeling." Their words carried no urgency, only quiet understanding. The silence between them wasn't empty, was full of all the things they didn't have to explain. Every so often, their eyes would meet and linger a moment too long. Not with passion, but with something deeper. The quiet recognition of a kindred soul as the sun began to set. Liam walked her back toward the main road. The world had turned to gold and silver, the light bending through the trees, painting everything in soft colors. You know, he said, breaking the silence, I used to wonder what happened to you after that last summer. You promised you'd come back the next year. Emma smiled wistfully. I meant to. But then college started and life got louder. I guess I thought we'd always have time. Liam nodded, his gaze distant. That's what everyone thinks until they realize time doesn't wait. The words stayed with her as they reached the gate. She thanked him for the walk, for the tea, for the comfort she hadn't realized she'd needed. He smiled softly, his breath visible in the cold air. You're here now, Emma? Maybe that's what matters. When she returned to her uncle's house, the fire was still. The next few days drifted by like gentle snowflakes, beautiful and strangely full. Emma settled into the rhythm of country life, helping her uncle with small chores, walking through the forest trails, and spending her evenings by the fire with a book. But every so often, her thoughts wandered toward the cabin on the hill toward Liam. She told herself it was just curiosity. A childhood friend rediscovered after years apart, nothing more. But curiosity has a way of softening into something else when the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. On the fourth day, Maple Creek woke to a storm. Heavy snow fell without pause, coating the world in white silence. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The house grew dim except for the glow of the fireplace. Well, Uncle David said with an amused sigh, setting down his cup, looks like we're back to the old ways. Emma smiled faintly, wrapping her scarf around her shoulders. How long do you think it'll last? Could be hours, maybe all night, but we'll be fine. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees. The storm had erased the usual stillness, replacing it with a wild beauty that was both breathtaking and intimidating. Emma walked to the window, peering through the snow. The cabin lights were barely visible, flickering like distant stars. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. She turned, startled. Uncle David looked up, surprised as well. When Emma opened the door, the cold rushed in along with a familiar face dusted in snow. Liam, she said, blinking. He smiled sheepishly, holding a small lantern. Sorry for the intrusion. Your uncle said I could come by if the power went out. My generator's down. Course, Uncle David said, rising to greet him. You're more than welcome. They settled around the fire, the storm howling outside as the flames crackled warmly between them. Liam brushed melted snow from his coat and laughed softly. Seems like Maple Creek wanted to make sure we caught up properly. Emma smiled, her heart warming despite the cold. Or maybe it just missed your dramatic entrances. Uncle David chuckled, excusing himself to check the candles in the kitchen, leaving the two of them alone in the flickering light. For a while, they sat quietly, watching the fire. The air felt heavy with unspoken thoughts, things that didn't need words. Finally, Liam spoke. I found something yesterday, he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small photograph, the corners slightly worn. Emma leaned closer. It was a picture of two children, herself and Liam, standing by the riverbank with muddy shoes and carefree smiles. I kept it all these years, he said softly. I thought I'd lost it until I found it in one of my sketchbooks. Emma's throat tightened. I remember that day. We were supposed to be helping Uncle David with firewood, but we ran off to chase frogs instead. And you fell into the river, he said, grinning. She laughed, shaking her head. You pushed me. I was saving you from slipping, he teased, by pulling me into the water. It worked, didn't it? You didn't fall alone. They both laughed, and for a moment, the years between them vanished. The room glowed brighter, not from the fire, but from something lighter, something human and true. Then, as the laughter faded, silence returned, but it wasn't awkward. It was full. Emma looked at him, noticing the faint worry in his eyes, the quiet patience in his expression. You've changed, she said softly. So have you, he replied. But in some ways, not at all. The storm outside deepened, the wind pressing against the windows like waves against the shore. Uncle David returned briefly, bringing them hot tea before retiring upstairs with a knowing smile. You two should keep the fire going, he said. It's going to be a long night. Hours passed. They talked about everything: dreams, regrets, the strange way life brings people back when they least expect it. Liam told her about leaving the city, about feeling lost in success. Emma shared how she'd built her life carefully, only to realize one day that she'd forgotten to live it. When the clock struck midnight, the power flickered back on. The lamps buzzed softly, the fire dimmed, but neither of them moved. Liam turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder," he began, "if the universe gives us second chances not because we need them, but because we finally know how to see them?" Emma met his gaze. There was no rush, no confession, no grand gesture, just a moment suspended in understanding. She nodded slowly. Maybe this is one of them. The snow outside began to slow. The night softened. And in that quiet, Emma felt something shift inside her, a realization that the loneliness she'd carried wasn't permanent. It was simply waiting for the right place, the right time, and maybe the right person to make sense again. When Liam finally stood to leave, the world outside was still and white. "I'll walk you back," she offered, but he shook his head gently. "You already did," he said, smiling. "You walked me back to a time I thought I'd lost." After he left, Emma stayed by the fire a while longer, staring at the photograph he'd left behind. The two smiling children looked impossibly young, untouched by time. She traced the edge of the picture with her thumb and whispered to herself, "Maybe some stories don't end. They just pause until we're ready to continue them." Upstairs, the old clock ticked softly, marking the passage of another quiet night in Maple Creek. Outside, the snow-covered cabin glowed once more, a steady light in the dark. And in that light, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope to be continued in Part 4, When the Heart Remembers. Part 4, The Unspoken Truth. The storm had passed, leaving Maple Creek wrapped in the quiet beauty of a winter morning. The sun rose slowly over the hills, turning the snow into a sea of silver. Emma stood by her window holding a cup of tea, watching light dance across the frozen world. Everything looked peaceful, but her heart felt anything but calm. Since that night by the fire, she had tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that Liam was just an old friend, that the comfort she felt around him was simple nostalgia. But no matter how she reasoned with herself, the truth echoed quietly inside her. Something had awakened. Something she wasn't ready to name. Later that day, she met him again at the edge of the forest trail. He was sketching the old bridge that crossed the frozen creek, his scarf loose around his neck, his hair dusted with snow. She almost turned back, afraid of what might show in her eyes. But he looked up and smiled before she could decide. "You found my favorite spot," he said, patting the bench beside him. "I thought you'd still be inside where it's warm." She sat down carefully, her breath misting in the cold air. "I couldn't stay cooped up forever. The world looks different after a storm." "It's different," he repeated softly. "Or clearer." They watched the water moving beneath the thin layer of ice, silent for a long moment. There was comfort in that silence, but also tension, the kind that forms when words linger too long unspoken. Finally, Emma said, "You know, I kept thinking about what you said the other night, about second chances." Liam's pencil paused, and "I don't know if I believe in them," she admitted. "Sometimes I think life gives us moments, not chances. And if we don't take them, they just fade." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Do you think this is one of those moments?" The question hung in the air like a breath that couldn't quite be released. Emma looked away, her eyes tracing the distant line of trees. "If it is," she said softly, "I'm not sure I know what to do with it." Liam set his sketchbook aside. "You don't have to do anything, Emma. Sometimes just being here is enough." But his voice carried something deeper, a quiet ache she felt in herself too. Two hearts circling the same truth, too cautious to step closer, too afraid to lose what little they had regained. They walked back together slowly, the snow crunching beneath their boots. Every so often, their hands brushed, accidental, hesitant, charged with everything they couldn't say. When they reached the gate, Emma stopped and turned toward him. Liam, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you come back here? Really? He met her gaze steadily. Because this was the only place that ever felt honest. She hesitated. Honest. He nodded. In the city, I was surrounded by people, but still felt alone. Here, even when I was by myself, I didn't feel empty. I think I came back to remember who I was before I started pretending. His words struck something deep inside her. She understood them more than she wanted to admit. That evening, Uncle David invited both of them to dinner. The three of them sat around the fire, sharing stories and laughter that filled the room with warmth. But beneath the easy smiles, there was a current, subtle and unspoken. Every time Emma's eyes met Liam's across the table, she felt it, a quiet recognition, a pulse of longing neither of them dared to name. After dinner, she walked him to the door. The sky outside was painted with stars, clear and endless. Thank you for tonight, Liam said softly. It was nice, she replied. Then, after a pause, it feels like the kind of night you'll remember, even if nothing happens. He smiled, understanding perfectly. Sometimes nothing means everything. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then only said good night. Emma, good night, she whispered, watching him disappear into the silver glow of snow and starlight. When she closed the door, her uncle's voice came gently from behind her. You care about him, don't you? Emma froze, then turned slowly. I don't know, she said honestly. I care about what I feel when he's around. It's like the world stops rushing for a wattower. The next morning dawned with a pale golden light spilling across the snow. The world seemed still, as if holding its breath. Emma woke early, unable to ignore the restlessness that had followed her through the night. She'd promised herself she would walk to the cabin, but now that the moment had come, she hesitated. What if she was misreading everything? What if she was imagining a connection that belonged only to memory? Still, the thought of staying silent felt heavier than the risk of being wrong. She wrapped herself in her coat and scarfed and stepped outside. The cold bit gently at her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. The air smelled like pine and firewood, and every sound the crunch of snow under her boots. The soft hum of the wind seemed amplified in the quiet. When she reached the cabin, Liam was outside splitting logs near the porch. He looked up at the sound of her approach, surprise softening into a smile. Morning, he called, brushing snow from his gloves. You're up early. So are you, she replied, her breath misting in the air. I thought I'd check if you were still snowed in. He chuckled. I'm fine, but I appreciate the rescue mission. She smiled, though her heart raced. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick with all the words neither of them had found the courage to say. Finally, Liam gestured toward the porch. Want to come inside? It's warmer there. Inside, the cabin was as cozy as she remembered soft light, the scent of coffee and sketches scattered across the table. A few of them were unfinished portraits, studies of faces and places he'd captured around Maple Creek, but one in particular caught her eye. Drawing of the forest path where they had walked days ago. And there, standing beneath the trees, was her. Her breath caught. You drew this. He hesitated, then nodded. I did. I wasn't planning to show you. It just happened. Emma looked at the sketch, tracing the outlines of herself on the paper calm. Contemplative, standing in a world of snow and light. It's beautiful, she said softly. But I don't remember standing like that. It's because you didn't, Liam replied, his tone quiet but sure. That's how I see you. The words hit her gently but deeply. She turned to face him, unsure of what to say. For a moment, her throat felt tight, and her heart beat faster than she wanted it to. Liam, she began, her voice trembling slightly, why are you really here? Not just in Maple Creek, but here, in this moment. With me? He set down his coffee mug and looked at her, steady and calm. Because, he said, after a long pause, I never stopped thinking about you. She froze, the room suddenly feeling smaller, warmer, quieter. He continued, his voice low but certain. I didn't understand it for years. I thought it was nostalgia's childhood memories that never faded. But when I saw you again, standing at that gate in the snow, I realized it wasn't the past that came back. It was everything I never said. Emma stared at him, her breath shallow. You can't mean that. We were kids. We didn't know what any of it meant. I know, he said softly. But some feelings don't start, they just wait. And maybe we were too young then to understand it, but we're not now. She looked away, blinking fast as emotion rose in her chest. You don't understand. I've built a life. I told myself I was fine on my own. I convinced myself I didn't need this. And are you fine? He asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the cabin at the sketches, the warmth, the quiet peace that surrounded them. Then she looked at him, the same boy who once pulled her into the river so she wouldn't fall alone. Now standing before her with honesty written in his eyes. No, she admitted at last. Not really. The confession came out like a breath she'd been holding for years. Her shoulders dropped, her eyes glistened, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't try to hide the truth. I've been lonely, Liam. Even in crowded rooms, even when life looked good on paper. I think I just forgot what it felt like to be seen. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough for his voice to soften between them. You're seen now, he said. Not because you came back, but because you never really left. The words hung there, tender and true. Emma felt something shift deep inside, like ice melting under sunlight. A quiet, steady warmth filled the room, and for once, she didn't push it away. They stood there for a long time, neither moving, both caught between past and present. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle, soft, endless. It felt like the world itself was pausing for them. Finally, Emma spoke again. I don't know where this goes. I don't even know what I'm ready for. Liam smiled, a quiet sadness in his eyes. That's okay. I'm not asking for answers. I just wanted to stop pretending I didn't care. Something about his honesty broke the last of her hesitation. She reached for the drawing on the table, the one where he'd captured her as he saw her peaceful whole. You drew me stronger than I feel, she said. He nodded. Because that's what I see when I look at you. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft whisper of snow against the window. When Emma finally left the cabin that afternoon, her heart felt heavy but alive. She knew nothing had been decided, but everything had changed. Truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. And maybe that was the point, as she walked back toward her uncle's house. She looked over her shoulder. Through the falling snow, Liam stood at the door, watching quietly. He didn't wave, and she didn't either. But the silence between them spoke louder than any words could dot in that silence. Something had begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but gently. Like the first thaw after a long winter, the snow lingered for days after that morning, the kind of soft, endless snowfall that turns the world into a painting. The little town of Maple Creek slowed down, as if even time itself wanted to rest. Emma spent most of those quiet hours helping her uncle around the house, sharing laughter over coffee and pretending her heart wasn't caught between calm and confusion. Yet every time she looked out the window toward the woods, she thought of Liam, the sketch on the table, his voice, the truth that could no longer be unsaid. She hadn't seen him since that day. Not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her told her the silence needed to settle first. Some feelings had to breathe before they could grow. It was on the third morning when her uncle found her sitting by the porch, lost in thought. You've been staring at the snow for an hour, he said kindly, handing her a steaming mug. Waiting for someone? Emma smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to understand what I'm feeling. He chuckled softly. Ah, that's always the harder part. Understanding the heart. She looked at him, surprised by his gentle tone. I've seen that look before, her uncle continued. Your mother had it once, years ago, right before she chose the life that made her happiest. It wasn't about being sure. It was about being honest. The words stayed with her long after he walked away. Being honest? It echoed in her mind until she couldn't ignore it anymore. That afternoon, Emma put on her coat, wrapped her scarf, and began the walk back to the cabin. The path was familiar now, her footprints from days before softened by fresh snow. Her heart beat fast, not with fear, but with something close to courage. When she reached the clearing, she saw smoke rising from the chimney. Liam was there, sketching by the window. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face before turning into a quiet smile. "You came back," he said simply. "I had to," she replied. "There were things I didn't say." He gestured for her to come inside. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her like a memory. She noticed the same drawing still lying on the table, her face beneath the tree's end, next to it. A blank page waiting to be filled. For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the air thick with everything left unspoken. Then Emma took a breath and said softly, "When you told me you never stopped thinking about me, I didn't know how to respond. I was scared. Not because of what you said, but because I felt the same, and I didn't know if it was right to feel that way." Liam's expression softened. "You don't have to apologize for that." "I'm not," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to be honest. You're a part of my story, Liam, whether we end up walking the same path or not. Seeing you again reminded me of who I was before life got complicated. You made me remember that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." He stepped closer, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. "And you reminded me that waiting doesn't mean wasting time. Sometimes it's just the heart learning patience." They both smiled, a little sadly, but with peace in their eyes. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever just truth, shared honestly between two people who once drifted apart and found their way back to understanding. Emma looked around the cabin one last time, taking in the sketches, the scent of wood smoke, the calm light filtering through the window. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said softly. "Back home. Back to whatever comes next." He nodded slowly. "I figured. You've always had a world waiting for you." There was a pause. Then she smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Maybe, but I think this place will always hold something I needed to find." He walked her to the door, the snow still falling gently outside. The silence between them was warm now, no longer heavy with unspoken things. As she turned to go, he handed her something, a folded piece of paper. "It's a sketch," he said quietly, "for you." She unfolded it just enough to see what was inside. It wasn't of her this time. It was